Actually, I want to get to this notion. You kind of that line about the only consistency in foreign and on U.S. foreign policy being inconsistency. This rhetoric, I again, and I think Matt Duss, who was on the program yesterday, distinguished between these kind of two prime arguments for attacking Syria, and one, the stronger one, obviously being that, of course, this is a really catastrophic human rights situation. The use of chemical weapons is a significant violation of international norms, and there's something to those arguments. On the other hand, this kind of our reputation, showing inconsistency, showing signs of weakness, this type of thing that you constantly hear regurgitated on cable news and particularly in Republican credibility, right? Excuse me, that's the word, credibility. Now, that seems intuitively like, I mean, to be polite, just an incredibly crude way of approaching policy. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that and also highlight, is there some recent actual research coming from political science literature that really casts doubt on this whole credibility approach to foreign policy making?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of scholars, especially those kind of from what's called the realist school of foreign policy, have written about this recently. And yeah, the political science literature does not bear out that credibility has any real effect on how nations, especially in around the world, perceive us. They don't, like I said, they know the Iranians don't need a lesson that the U.S. can be inconsistent in its strategy, and that it might not bomb Bashar Assad for gassing 1,000 people with sarin, but it might still bomb Iran if it's discovered that Iran is going forward with production of a nuclear weapon. These,
Under Bush, we might have bombed Cyprus for what Assad is doing. I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just like you can look at Egypt today and see that there just is no consistency in U.S. foreign policy. And, I agree with a lot of the critics that have said that Obama has shown to have no grander strategy in Syria beyond maybe trying to not get deeply involved, seems to be his only strategy. And I think that that's a legitimate criticism. I think there's some value in a strategy of not wanting to get deeply involved, but I agree that there is an absence of a proactive strategy there. But that said, it's not, that doesn't exclude us from getting involved anywhere else down the line. It's just that's not how the U.S. government has ever operated, and that's true whether it's in the Obama administration or in other administrations. You can see Bush's so-called freedom agenda fell apart on its own merits because of policies undertaken by the Bush administration.
Right.
His effort to have a coup to overthrow the democratic government in Palestine because he didn't like the anti-Israel militant group Hamas. The way that Bush, acquiesced to Hosni Mubarak's crackdown on democracy groups in 2005 and 2006. It's just been there's just remarkable inconsistency throughout American foreign policy, and any decently smart observer of U.S. foreign policy abroad will understand this and know this. And it doesn't matter what pundits in the pages of the Washington Post editorial board and the Wall Street Journal opinion pages say about it. It just doesn't matter that much.
Right. I think that probably can't be underscored enough. Related to this credibility argument is the administration's use and the focus on Iran, that the subtext of this is that we need to take action here to show Iran we mean business, and very, very kind of familiar rhetoric from the Iran playbook in Washington. Now, it strikes me that this is happening simultaneously as you have a new president in Iran who certainly has a far more kind of rational, moderate approach than his predecessor. More importantly, at this moment, Iran's supreme leader is signing off, apparently, on Rouhani's more moderate approach. You have a foreign minister in Iran who is going to play a much larger role in the nuclear negotiations, who has worked closely with the West and America in the past, specifically with Afghanistan. So it seems like just at this time that this kind of constant trope of we need to do this to get at Iran, there actually is some potential signals from Iran that this might be one of the best opportunities we've had in a while to potentially do something different.
To be fair, I wonder how many of them even realize that Ahmadinejad isn't the leader of Iran anymore.
Well, maybe not a lot of the people on Twitter. Pamela Geller actually thinks that Rouhani is Ahmadinejad's body double. So she's got a whole, and they're both related to Malcolm X. But anyways, go ahead, Ali. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's. You're right. There's this opening with Iran, and what a lot of the Iran hawks, they constantly harp on the fact that Ali Khamenei, Iran's unelected supreme leader, has final say on all matters of state, and that's true. But it is not a total dictatorship by Ali Khamenei. There are different political currents, and they can be influential on policy. And, judging from the results of the 2009 election, which lots of people, myself included, believe was a widespread fraud to keep Ahmadinejad in office and to keep the reformers and moderates out, judging by that, when you look at Rouhani's victory, especially given the campaign platform that he ran on of moderation and specifically transparency in the nuclear program, and wanting to ease sanctions to ease Iran's economic woes, it's clear that the supreme leader has at least opened the door to these currents being policy. If it were an absolute dictatorship and he didn't want any transparency on any of this stuff, he would have never let this guy win.
Right.
And it shows that there are the politics of Iran do matter. Now, Rouhani is in a precarious position because Iran's parliament and its many factions of its Byzantine power structures are hardliners. They're people that don't believe in Rouhani's policy of moderation. And so he's in a place where he's trying to bolster this view to give some legitimacy to, what many observers, including myself, think will be a bid for diplomacy to strike a deal with the U.S. Now, a U.S. intervention in Syria certainly makes that more difficult because the hardliners are sure to attack Rouhani and saying, listen, you want to talk to these guys, and they're going in and attacking our ally in Syria. And that will give Rouhani a political headache that stands to potentially weaken him within Iran's power structures. That said, I think that we should sort of judge intervention. Of course, we should consider factors like this, but we can't make decisions based just on the politics of foreign countries. We have to decide what's going on for America here and make our decisions based on that. But it's certainly a consideration of what it'll do to diplomacy with Iran. And in the sense that it might give hardliners a line of attack against Rouhani, even a limited strike against Syria could be bad for the prospects for diplomacy with Iran. However, if America were to get more entangled in Syria into a more robust intervention and into having to do this repeated sort of like a cat and mouse thing with striking chemical weapons, say if the U.S. does undertake these limited strikes and then Bashar Assad again uses chemical weapons and the U.S. feels compelled to act again, starts feeding weapons to the opposition, sets up a no-fly zone, all those kinds of things, a more robust intervention by the U.S. will actually make it more difficult to attack Iran because, as we learned over the past decade, being involved in two wars simultaneously, even in relatively limited foreign wars, is not an easy thing to do. And I think that the American public will probably be well aware of those potential costs of launching a second war if we're already in an ongoing war with Syria. And so I think it's a real, what the most sort of ardent of the Syria hawks are pushing, and they are pushing this as having to send a message to Iran and, it's Iran's ally, Bashar Assad. They're pushing that very hard, but the robust intervention they call for, I think, will, unbeknownst to them, actually make it more difficult, if it comes down to it, for the U.S. to attack Iran.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think that it's it's obviously judging it by our interests first and foremost, but I think ultimately our interests in that region, if it could be, and across the world, if it could be pulled off, the possibility of having a different type, more normalized relationship with Iran would have many intrinsic and ancillary benefits that would precisely benefit a situation like the one going on in Syria.
No doubt.
Yeah. So as a kind of final sort of broad wrap up question, you were saying earlier that you do think that a more proactive approach could be argued for. I know and I think this is another parenthetically. This is another very important distinction to bring up. There isn't action and no action, and the only action is military. There's many other paths of action to at least attempt to do something about the situation in Syria. So what would, in the Ali Gharib view, be? What would be the smartest path of action moving forward with regards to Syria?
Well, I mean, look, diplomacy has not worked out very well, but we're getting indications from even the Iranians that they would be willing to push some sort of diplomacy on Syria. It may not accomplish, Obama's stated goal of Assad being removed from power, but it could at least staunch some of the bloodletting. I think that's definitely an avenue worth pursuing. Most urgently, Syria is the worst refugee crisis in the world right now, and a lot more needs to be undertaken by the U.S. and its regional allies in order to do that. Right now, our allies in Turkey and Jordan are bearing the brunt of the Syrian refugee problem. And I think it was funny. There was this, Kerry said that the Gulf Arab regimes, Saudi Arabia and the GCC allies and the Emirates and so on, have offered to pay for U.S. airstrikes, a limited intervention in Syria. And these guys should take their billions of dollars and pour it into the UN Refugee Agency, which has only come up with 40% of the budget it feels it needs to address this refugee problem. I mean, this is like a humanitarian catastrophe, and one that can be addressed with adequate funding. And of course, it's not going to end until the war there ends, which there's not many prospects of happening anytime soon. But it can certainly be ameliorated with the help of groups like the UN Refugee Agency and support of other regional actors, especially those that are incredibly flush with cash. And so I think that those are the sort of steps that, whether or not we undertake this intervention, we need to engage heavily in the diplomatic process and on the refugee problem. And I think we got to disabuse ourselves of the notion that doing something like pouring in weapons into the hands of even vetted members of the opposition is a humanitarian intervention. It's neither here nor there when it comes to humanitarianism to give guns to one side or the other of a civil war. That's only a recipe for more violence. And I'm not saying that it's unjust, certainly, for rebels to fight against Assad's government, which is really a morally catastrophic regime in and of itself. But that is not a humanitarian intervention.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, flooding Syria with weapons is not a humanitarian intervention necessarily, and address the crisis and refugees immediately. Ali Gharib, he's an independent journalist covering the Middle East, national security, foreign policy. Thanks so much for joining us on the Majority Report.